Good morning to all. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to return to the shul, shul of my childhood. Go back a long way with a lot of you, and it's very special to be able to come and address you. I decided to pick the topic of faith, living with faith, and use some insights in this parsha just gone by to kick us off and perhaps take things further, time permitting. So we'll look at faith in our living, in our life, carrying faith in our day-to-day life. We'll look at faith in our Torah learning, so approaching Torah with an element of faith. And then finally end off with the idea of faith in our tefillah, in our davening. There's no greater calming influence than the security of the certainty that faith brings. A person who's connected to Hashem and feels faith, lives with faith, lives on a different plane, lives in a more relaxed life. We find in the last week's parasha, the parasha begins with the idea, the concept, the halachas relating to Shemitah, resting the land every seventh year. The land of Israel was not worked upon. And the Torah says as far as Sheish Shanim Tizras Sadecha v'Sheish Shanim Tizmar Karmecha v'Asaftas v'Asa. You work the land 6 years, uvashana hashvis, but in the seventh year, Shabbos Shabbosay Nihi Elor. It's a restful time should be for the ground. Shabbos Lashem, a sabbatical for Hashem. Sadcha le'Sizra v'Charmecha le'Sizmar. Your field you shouldn't work, and your vineyard you shouldn't work either. And then the Torah goes on later on, and it says as follows. It says, keep my Torah, and you will live securely in your land. The land will bring forth its food. As you can imagine, in those days, they were much more living with agriculture, connected to the produce of the land and dependent upon it. So the land will bring forth its fruits. You'll eat and you'll be satisfied. And you should sit in security, dwell in security on it. Now that should be enough. The Torah says, keep the Shemitah, don't work the land the seventh year, and you'll have everything you need, and you'll be satisfied and secure. But the Torah then goes on and says something very unusual. The Torah then goes on and says, that if you ask, what are we going to eat? Practically speaking, how are we going to do it in the seventh year? We haven't sown the land, we haven't gathered in the produce. Then says Hashem, then I'll bring forth my blessing lochem to you in the sixth year already. And it will bring forth produce for 3 full years. So you'll have the sixth year which you work the land, the seventh which you don't, and then the eighth as a residue of not working the land in the seventh, you'll still have for the 8th year. 3 solid years. Enough for 3 years in the sixth year. And then he goes on, he expands on that blessing. But the obvious question is, what on earth is going on here? The Torah says, keep Shemitah, don't work the land, you'll have everything you need, and you will be satisfied and secure. But then the Torah says, no, but if you ask, if you question, if you show a lack of faith, and you begin to question, how on earth are we going to do it? You've promised it, but how is it going to work? Then I'll bring forth my blessing. And then this blessing, this second blessing, seems to be far greater than the first. The first is you'll be satisfied, you'll have everything you need, you'll sit securely in your land. Yet the second blessing is you'll have so much, you'll have 3 full years worth, and you'll have plenty, you won't know what to do with it. So what on earth is going on? I think the clue is in Rashi. In other words, it seems to be that only those who question HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they will be the ones who will merit great shefa, great plenty, but others will just be satisfied. So Rashi says on the first bracha, your stomachs will feel satisfied. In other words, you'll have all the nutrients and all the goodness and all the quantity that you need. And I think what Rashi is saying really is that there won't be more physically, because the reality is the rules of nature are you don't sow the land, you don't bring in the produce, there won't physically be the quantity there. But what Rashi is saying is the miracle will be, the blessing will be that you'll have a tiny amount, but that will give you everything you need. You'll have all the nutrients from that and you won't be hungry, you'll feel satisfied. If you question your faith and you wonder how it's actually going to be, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give you what seems to be a blessing, a huge quantity. But how are you going to handle that quantity? You're going to have to build warehouses, you're going to have to bring in staff and busy yourselves with the dealing with the produce in the 6th year. You're going to have to guard it, protect it from rodents, from mold. Can you think of the project and all the time that you're physically involved in enjoying this plentiness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has sent, and you're walking around feeling on top of the world, wow, look, Hashem's keeping his commitment. In reality, this is all only happening because of your lack of faith. If you had faith, there would be far less need for all this extra toil and trouble. And in fact, the reality would be you'd have a lot more time available for yourselves to get on with what you're here in this world for. So again, this idea of faith and being able to connect, yes, we're nowhere near that level, and we work and strive to be on a level where we're able to genuinely be able to not question in reality how things are going to work out. Someone who is on that plane clearly merits a far greater level of hashgacha, of provision from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a way that's hidden from those who don't have that faith. Those who have the faith are able to really enjoy the plentiness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives without having to toil and trouble. It's all there on their plate and ready for them. We just have to recognize that. And I think in our own lives, if we stand up and work and strive to be on that level, rather than even trying to persuade others, just working on ourselves, we, without realizing, act as a beacon of light to others. And the ripple effect of our faith has such an effect on our family members, on those who are our friends, and even those beyond, and our work colleagues, without even realizing it. Self-investment in this area is something that really brings dividends not only to us, but all those around us. I'd like to look further on in the parasha. It goes on to the halachas relating to a person who stole and was unable to repay. As we know, they were sold as an Eved Ivri, they were sold as a Jewish slave. And so what happened was a person who stole he was caught unable to pay. He was sold at the market value of a Jewish slave. It had to be to a Jewish individual. And in that way, by doing so, he repaid his debt. And when the Shemitah year came, the end of the 6th year, he was let free. And if he didn't want to go free, he had the choice to stay on. He wasn't encouraged to do so, but he has a choice to stay on. And his ear was pierced and pinned to the door post for a short while, just as a sign, and a sign that the avdus, the slavery, is not something that he should choose. And then he would stay on and continue under his Jewish order, his Jewish master. And there were numerous questions in understanding this. We learn this, and it's perplexing, the whole concept of it. I mean, where's the equity? Where's the ethical approach to this? The Torah, it takes we know that it's the example, the beacon of equity and ethical behavior, especially in days gone by. The Torah was the first to be concerned of human rights and things like that. And yet we see someone who can afford to pay gets off seemingly with a small fine and walks away. Yet someone who steals not because they simply are greedy, but they steal because they're in dire straits. They don't have anything, and they're told, no, you can't pay. Well, then you'll have to go into slavery. What's going on? How are we to understand this whole concept? Another question is, why does this individual get his ear pierced and pulled to the doorpost? So Chazal tell us, you heard that Har Sinai don't steal, and you went and stole. Well, firstly, at Har Sinai we heard the 10 Commandments, Lei signov in the Ten Commandments is do not kidnap. Do not steal comes out of it comes in Chumash Vayikra. It's a different part of the Torah where it says Lei signovu, that is don't steal. So what's going on? And why after 6 years? Why do we wait? Why didn't we do it straight away when the person's caught? And both individuals, the one who can pay and the one who can't, they both didn't listen at Har Sinai Lei signov. So what on earth is going on? And finally, the Torah says it's forbidden. In fact, the parasha ends off Ki li bnei Yisrael avodayim. It says, you are slaves to me, Hashem. Don't be slaves to anyone else. This individual is being told voluntarily he's able to choose to become a slave. In other words, the Torah forbids us to enslave ourselves voluntarily. And yet the Torah says, but if you want to do something forbidden, this is how you do it. What's going on here? Where do we find the Torah that something's forbidden, and yet the Torah says, go ahead, if you're going to do something forbidden, this is the way to do it. Yet if we consider and ponder exactly what's going on, I think it's very clear. The first thing is, if you look at the halachas, the onus on the Jewish master, the responsibilities on taking on this individual. Firstly, who on earth is going to buy a slave who's a thief? The whole reason he's being sold is because he's a thief. You're going to have him in your home and you're going to trust him. Secondly, if you're lacking clothing or you're lacking bedding, he gets priority over the master and the master's family. He has to be prioritized. His needs are prioritized over the master. Clearly, this individual, this Jewish individual, this Jewish slave, has a role far different to a typical slave. The answer is that only an individual who's looking to do a chesed, who's looking to do a kindness and rehabilitate this individual, is going to take on this slave. Yes, he's buying him, he's paying money for him. It's clearly a tzedakah case. There's no question about it. And the whole aim is to help this individual rehabilitate. A person who steals from greed is not going to be healed. That's a problem they've got to deal with between them and Hashem. If they can then pay off what they stole, that's between them and Hashem. An individual who steals because they can't make ends meet needs help. And this individual is now being taken on by this master, so to speak, and shown how to make ends meet and how to survive in life. And therefore, now it all makes sense. If it's not an enslavement, but it's rather a rehabilitative program done by a Baal Chesed, someone who's taking this project on and who takes on major responsibilities by buying this slave, then we can understand, number one, it's not applicable to an individual who can pay. Secondly, it's only relevant after 6 years where this individual wants to stay on, that it's clear he hasn't yet taken on board the true meaning of why he's been enslaved. He hasn't used the opportunity to really rehabilitate himself. Obviously, he needs to be willing and he needs to put in the effort himself to be rehabilitated. If that's the case, then he needs to continue on. And that's why it's only done after 6 years and not at the time. And it's not relevant to the other individuals who stole and paid because there's no rehabilitation that we humans can do. With regards to the wording, you heard at Har Sinai, don't steal. It doesn't say don't steal. Le signov, we know, is in the Ten Commandments, is don't kidnap. Well, he's voluntarily kidnapping himself. He has the opportunity now to go free at the end of the time and be a slave to Hashem. And instead, he's choosing to voluntarily continue his enslavement to this Jewish master. And therefore, he's not listening to the Aseret Adibros, the Ten Commandments, by voluntarily kidnapping himself, so to speak, and staying on. Finally, this last point of being told that we're not allowed to voluntarily enslave ourselves, but the Torah is saying this is the way to do it. I think there is one other example in the Torah. There isn't really time to go into it, but it's the case of Eifshes Yefas, a soldier that goes out to war and is clearly affected by what he sees, and he uncontrollably feels he would like to take as a marriage partner a Eifshes Yefas, a woman who he's captured. So the Torah goes through a whole process of how he does it. And again, there it's discouraged, and it's numerous time periods that he has to go through until he actually can marry her. and he's given plenty of time to retract and change his mind. But there the Mefarshim say, Lo dibra Torah ela keneged yetzer hara. The Torah only spoke against the evil inclination, a person who's unable to control himself. And Chatzkel Abramsky used to say that if the Torah gives us something that's forbidden and tells us that in certain circumstances it can be permitted, then the Torah clearly, everything else that the Torah said is not permitted, clearly the Torah knows that we have the ability to control ourselves with. The fact that the Torah takes one thing and says this, the Torah knows that we're not always able to control ourselves, is quite a powerful message for everything else that we are forbidden. But I think if we take that again back to here, this individual Nebuch, he got to a point, such a low in his life, that he wasn't able to make ends meet. He wasn't able to face the world. And now he's been taken on by this person of loving kindness who wants to rehabilitate him, and he's not yet ready to face the world. So the Torah accepts that he's someone who's in that state. He's just going to go back to his original state. If he's released, then yes, he needs to take on board why he's there, and that's why he gets his ear pierced. But essentially, he's voluntarily allowed to stay on only because he's recognizing now what this state, what this is all about, and his rehabilitative state, and what's required of him in order to be able to get through and serve in a way that will genuinely rehabilitate him. So again, here we have an example of learning something, learning some Torah, being told something doesn't seem to make sense. And yet, if we look a little bit deeper, suddenly we open up avenues and we have faith in what we're learning. My Rosh Hashiva always used to tell me, when you learn Torah, we have to learn with a mindset of assuming everything, there's a lot we're missing, assuming everything does make sense. And if something doesn't make sense, not that it's wrong, but that we need to work in our mind in order to be able to get to a point where we do have a clarity and understanding. And that takes faith. That takes a lot of faith. And faith in Torah learning is a big part of Torah learning in a way that's perhaps very different to academic learning, which is much more plainly logic driven, and something is not understood, there may well be an error in what we're actually learning. The final point I'd like to talk about, faith in our tefillah. Keep it short because time's moved on. We daven. Habit is a big challenge in tefillah. We stand and we daven and we try and connect to Hashem. But within our davening, faith is a crucial element of our davening. Our prayer, the main bolt, the beginning of our prayer is recognizing that we're made b'fnei Hashem. That we're standing in front of Hashem and we're beseeching Him because He's the only one who can ultimately give us everything we need. So what is prayer? Is it a vending machine? We're putting in some coins with our prayers and we're hoping to get out what we've ordered. Clearly, there is an element of beseeching Hashem for what we believe our needs are, but essentially knowing that He ultimately knows what's best. And our job is simply to connect with Him and raise ourselves to a level where we're able to receive everything we need. Ultimately, Hashem knows best. And by simply recognizing that, perhaps taking a moment before we start, even at the beginning of the Shemona Esrei, just recognizing that before we begin, will add so much more to our tefillah and will raise us on a different level. A prominent professor once held up a £50 note at the beginning of a lecture, and he asked everyone who would like this £50 note. And British mentality, people are uncomfortable. No one put up their hand, of course. Then he crumpled it in his hand, and then he opened it and said, "Now, who would like it now?" Now a few people put up their hand. Then he took it, he squashed it, put it on the floor, and rubbed the sole of his foot on top of it. Then he picked it up, unraveled it, and held it, and said, "Who wants it now?" Almost the whole, all of the crowd put up their hand. He threw it into the crowd, and he said, "What I've taught you now is that essentially us humans are of intrinsic value. And by recognizing that, by doing so, by realizing that we have intrinsic value or whatever challenges life brings on us, however we're crushed and we're crumpled, the individual is still there and we still have the same core value. And that's not changed. That's unchanged by whatever goes on around us. And by beginning with that, before we consider anything else, by recognizing our own intrinsic value and the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's put faith in us by putting us in this world, that in its own right gives us a head start in being able ourselves to reach a level of faith. Both faith and fear demand that we believe in something we can't see, but essentially we choose. In the words of Rabbi Sachs, faith is not a certainty, but the courage to live with uncertainty. And if I can add, but if we live with the uncertainty, but with the knowledge that ultimately Hashem's running the show, and if that's the case, anything that shouldn't happen won't happen. Thank you very much.
Want to add anything or ask anything? Okay, so I will sign off to those on Zoom. Just to say to those on Zoom, next week we have a. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
14 years ultimately.
The Roch Sheva Shodim, in other words, ultimately working for something. Yes, he was tricked. So perhaps there's an element of mekachtos, of a business deal that's gone wrong. But essentially there was out of choice, and it was necessary. You're saying from the point of view of slavery, the truth is that Har Sinai hadn't happened yet. And we said, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzei Mitzrayim, you should be, the whole idea, it's all linked to Mitzrayim. I've taken you out of Mitzrayim. You've had an example of avdus, of slavery, and now I want you to be right. True, but and they did try and keep the Torah before, but essentially, yeah, this was part of the destiny of Klal Yisrael, and he was working for something specific. It wasn't a general avdus, a general slavery. And again, we say he worked, but it wasn't entire slavery. He had his own. It was an employee situation set up. In fact, the Torah says when this Jewish person who's bought the Eved Ivri, this Jewish slave, he has to treat him kasachir, like an employee. He mustn't make him feel like he's a slave, even though he is called an Eved.
Thank you very much for that. Those on Zoom, just a reminder, next week we have a special breakfast and learn session. So details are going out. Chief Rabbi is joining us next week for breakfast and learn. So it'll be a big one. But thank you very much, Rabbi Chayim, for joining us this morning. I will turn off the Zoom and then I'll